All right, get ready because today we're going deep on a really cool alternative to fasting.
Well, this is going to be good.
We're looking at this YouTube video by Dr. Sten Ekberg. It's called "This is Much Easier Than Fasting with Amazing Results."
Catchy title,
It
right?
really is. And the content's even better. He's saying you can get the benefits of, get this, a 3-day water fast
Ooh,
with just a modified 5-day diet plan.
sign me up.
I know, right? And we're talking some serious potential benefits here, like think weight loss, autophagy. That's your body doing a deep clean on a cellular level,
Right.
even reversing insulin resistance.
It makes you wonder, can you really mimic fasting without, well, actually fasting?
Exactly. So before we get into the details, can you give us a quick rundown on the basics of fasting? Why do people even do it in the first place?
Well, fasting has been around forever, for centuries, often tied to religious practices.
Right.
But lately, it's really gaining traction for its health benefits. You're basically abstaining from food, or certain types of food, for a specific period of time.
Yeah.
And this triggers something called metabolic switching,
Okay.
where your body shifts from burning glucose for energy to burning fat.
And that can lead to weight loss, but also better blood sugar control and less inflammation.
Exactly.
But let's be real, a full-on water fast,
Yeah.
that sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
And Dr. Ekberg seems to get that in his video, right?
He does. He acknowledges that water fasting can be tough.
Right.
You might feel weak, get those hunger pangs, even feel a bit lightheaded.
Yeah, definitely not fun.
So this 5-day plan he's proposing, it's presented as a more approachable way to get similar benefits.
Okay, I like where this is going. So what are the rules? I know Dr. Ekberg likes to keep things pretty simple.
He does. Rule number 1, it's all about calorie reduction.
Okay.
You eat less than 50% of your normal calorie intake.
Wow, that's a big drop.
It is. It forces your body to shift into a different metabolic mode.
So calorie restriction is key. What else is there?
Rule number 2 focuses on protein. He recommends keeping it between 15 to 20 grams per day. And you adjust that a little based on your body size.
Okay, now this is interesting because we're always told to make sure we get enough protein.
Right. It's usually seen as this dietary hero.
So what's the reasoning behind cutting back so drastically?
Well, that low protein intake is actually one of the main things that triggers autophagy.
Ah, that cellular cleaning process.
Exactly. When protein is scarce, your body gets resourceful.
Okay.
It starts breaking down old and damaged cell components to recycle them. It's like decluttering on a microscopic level.
I love that analogy. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
And he also suggests going low carb to make the diet even more effective.
he does.
So I've got low calorie, low protein, low carb. I'm already getting curious about how this all comes together in an actual meal plan.
Me too. It's fascinating.
Well, good news, he gives a very detailed example in the video.
Perfect.
So let's break it down. What's meal number 1 look like?
Get ready for a superfood bonanza. It's a soup and salad combo.
Sounds healthy.
Lots of fresh, whole, plant-based foods.
Okay.
For the salad, we've got leafy greens, lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, onions, all drizzled with some olive oil for those healthy fats.
That sounds good.
And then a serving of vegetable soup.
Wait, so lots of veggies on a low-carb diet. I'm noticing the focus seems to be on keeping the protein low, even if it means the carbs are a bit higher than you might expect.
You're picking up on something really important here.
Oh.
It's the combo of very low protein, moderate carbs, and the overall calorie reduction that really makes this plan unique. That massive calorie drop basically overrides the impact of the carbs,
Okay.
and it still allows your body to get into ketosis,
Oh, wow.
similar to what happens during a prolonged fast.
So it's not just about the carbs, it's about the whole picture.
Exactly. It's about how they all work together.
That makes sense. I'm starting to get the logic here. But just to be sure, how much protein are we actually talking about in this first meal?
Surprisingly little. All those veggies have almost no protein, so the bulk of it comes from the soup.
Okay.
And when you add it all up, it comes to just over 6 grams of protein.
That's impressive. Most people eat that much in a single snack.
Right.
It really shows how carefully this plan is designed. Okay, so what about meal number 2?
For dinner, he makes this vibrant veggie stir-fry. Think leek, onion, cauliflower, asparagus, avocado,
Sounds delicious.
even a bit of sweet potato for those who aren't strictly low carb.
Okay.
And of course, it's all cooked in extra virgin olive oil, sticking with those healthy fats.
So there's room for variety and flavor, even with all the restrictions.
Absolutely. He even mentions that if you want to go super low carb, you can swap the sweet potato for more asparagus or avocado.
I love the flexibility. But what about the protein? How does this meal stack up?
This one comes in at a tiny 8.4 grams of protein.
Wow. He's really strategic about those food choices.
He is choosing foods that offer volume and nutrients without a ton of protein.
So smart. Okay, we've seen the meals. Now for the big picture. What's a full day look like in terms of calories and macros?
The grand total for the day is just 867 calories.
Wow, that's low.
It breaks down to 69% fat, 7% protein, and 24% carbs.
So high fat, very low protein, and moderate carbs. That definitely challenges the usual advice we hear, which is usually more like 30% fat and way more protein.
That's what makes it so interesting. Even though 24% carbs might seem high,
Yeah.
it's actually considered low carb in this context because the total calorie intake is so low.
So it's all about the interplay of those macros, not just focusing on one in isolation.
Exactly. And that's how this plan manages to mimic the metabolic state of fasting, prompting your body to start burning fat and kicking off that cellular cleaning process.
I'm already starting to rethink the way I view food.
Yeah.
But we've only talked about what you can eat on this plan. Let's flip it. What's off limits?
Yeah, let's talk about the no-go list.
All right, hit me with it. What can't we eat on this plan?
Well,
Oh.
anything high in protein is out, as you might expect. We're talking all animal products.
Okay.
Meat, poultry, fish, even bone broth.
Wait, even bone broth? I thought that was like a fasting staple.
I know, right? But remember, we're trying to keep that protein super low.
Right.
And bone broth, even though it's got that health halo, can actually have a surprising amount of protein.
Oh, interesting.
Just 1 cup can have like 8 to 10 grams, which is almost your whole protein budget for the day.
Wow, that's a good reminder that even the healthiest foods need to be considered in context.
Absolutely.
So what else is off limits, protein-wise?
Legumes are out. Beans, lentils, peas, all too much protein.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Eggs, dairy, nuts, and seeds are all no-goes.
Okay, so if it's got a good amount of protein, it's a no-go.
Pretty much.
But there's still plenty of deliciousness to be had. You mentioned leafy greens are basically unlimited.
They are. Load them up.
What else can we enjoy?
Non-starchy veggies are your best friend on this plan.
Right?
Broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, Brussels sprouts. The more colorful your plate, the better.
Sounds good to me. What about starchy veggies? Like potatoes, corn, are those totally off limits?
Not necessarily. You can have some tubers, like sweet potatoes,
Okay.
rutabaga, parsnips, but Dr. Ekberg says go easy on those since they've got more carbs and calories.
So it's all about balance.
Right?
And what about healthy fats? We've talked a lot about olive oil. Are there other options?
Olive oil is definitely the star here, and he recommends about 4 to 5 tablespoons a day.
Okay.
But the key is staying under that 50% calorie mark. So if you're using other fats, adjust accordingly.
Gotcha. Portion control is key.
Always.
Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but let's get practical.
Okay.
Can you walk us through what a typical day of meals and snacks might look like on this plan?
Let's do it. Remember, Dr. Ekberg's plan actually starts with a bit of intermittent fasting,
Oh, right.
pushing that first meal to later in the day. So technically, breakfast is optional.
Okay.
But if you're someone who likes to eat breakfast, what are some good protein-sparing options?
Well, a big bowl of leafy greens with some non-starchy veggies like cucumber and bell pepper, drizzled with some olive oil, maybe some avocado for healthy fats and creaminess.
That's a great option. You could also go for some vegetable soup.
Oh, yeah.
Just make sure it's not made with bone broth.
Right, gotta watch that protein. Now, what about lunch? I'm picturing big, colorful salads.
Salads are perfect. Lots of leafy greens, non-starchy veggies, a simple vinaigrette with olive oil and lemon juice. That's a recipe for success.
What if I'm craving something a little more substantial? Could I have a veggie burger, for example?
Potentially, but you'd have to watch the ingredients.
Oh, right.
A lot of veggie burgers are made with lentils or beans, which are too high in protein for this plan.
Ah, good point. I guess I'd need to get creative and make my own low-protein version.
Exactly. There are tons of recipes online for veggie burgers using things like cauliflower rice,
Oh, nice.
mushrooms, oats, that kind of thing.
I love that it encourages people to experiment in the kitchen.
It does.
Okay, so we've got breakfast and lunch down. What about dinner?
Well, Dr. Ekberg's stir fry is a great starting point. Satisfying, flavorful, and low in protein. You could also try a big pot of vegetable soup or stew. Just be mindful of any hidden protein sources.
Good point. Soups and stews are perfect for those colder months.
They are.
Now, what about snacks? I tend to get hungry between meals, so I need some good options to tide me over.
Snacking can be tricky.
Oh, how
A
so?
lot of traditional snack foods are either too high in protein
Right.
or full of processed carbs.
Yeah, no chips and dip for me then.
But don't worry, there are still some good choices.
Okay.
A small piece of fruit, like berries or melon, can do the trick.
Right.
Raw veggies like carrots and celery sticks are always good too.
Those are classics. What if I'm craving something a little more indulgent?
Remember, it's only for 5 days.
True.
If you absolutely need something a little extra, maybe a small square of dark chocolate
Ooh, I like where your head's at.
or a spoonful of coconut butter could satisfy that
Yeah,
craving.
that sounds pretty manageable.
It is.
So we've talked about meal planning, smart shopping, and dealing with those pesky cravings.
Hmm.
But what about Dr. Ekberg's pre-packaged fasting-mimicking kits?
Oh, yeah.
Are those a good option for people who, don't want to do all the cooking and prepping?
They can be. The convenience factor is definitely a plus.
Right.
Everything's pre-portioned and ready to go,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it less likely you'll stray from the plan.
That's helpful.
But there are some things to keep in mind.
Okay, lay it on me. What are the potential downsides?
Well, the cost can be a bit of a barrier.
Yeah.
These kits can cost around $200 for a 5-day supply.
Whoa. That's pretty steep.
It is, for basically soup mixes, crackers, and food bars.
So the DIY approach is definitely more budget-friendly.
For sure.
Anything else to consider?
Dr. Ekberg also points out that the kits tend to be a bit limited in variety,
Oh.
and they're heavy on starch and chicory root.
Ah, for thickening and sweetening.
Right.
And chicory root can be a problem for some people, can it?
Exactly. It's a type of fiber that can be hard to digest,
Mm-hmm.
especially for people with digestive issues like IBS.
Right.
It can lead to bloating, gas, discomfort, which isn't ideal when you're already restricting your food.
Not at all. So it's convenience versus cost and potential tummy troubles, a trade-off to consider.
It is.
But regardless of which route you choose, the big question is, does it actually work?
According to Dr. Ekberg, both the DIY approach and the prepackaged kits can effectively induce ketosis and autophagy.
That's good to hear. So you're likely to get those desired metabolic shifts either way.
That's the idea, but it's important to remember that everyone's different.
Right.
Results can vary.
Of course.
And as with any dietary intervention, long-term studies are limited. It's not a guaranteed quick fix.
Yeah, and it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor before making big dietary changes.
Absolutely.
So for those who are intrigued and want to give this a try, how often does Dr. Ekberg recommend doing this 5-day plan?
For general maintenance and disease prevention, he suggests doing it about once a quarter.
Okay, like a seasonal reset.
Exactly.
What about someone dealing with a specific issue, like insulin resistance? Would they benefit from doing it more often?
Possibly. He suggests that for those looking to reverse conditions like type 2 diabetes or other insulin resistance-related issues, a monthly cycle might be beneficial.
Okay.
But again, working with a healthcare professional to figure out the best frequency for you is always the best approach.
It's all about finding what works for you.
Exactly.
This has been so insightful. I'm really starting to see the appeal of this alternative to fasting.
Yeah,
It seems much more doable for the average person
I think so too.
while still offering those potential health benefits. And it really gets you thinking about what other ways we can impact our health through what we eat.
It does. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the potential of using food as a tool
Right.
to impact our health on a deeper level.
It's not just about calories in, calories out anymore.
It's not. We can actually nudge our metabolic processes in different directions by making deliberate choices about what we eat.
And this 5-day plan is just one example.
It is, but it really makes you curious about what else is possible.
It does. This feels like just the beginning when it comes to understanding the connection between food and our bodies.
Oh, it is. It makes you wonder what other dietary approaches are out there waiting to be discovered.
Right.
Approaches that could potentially unlock even greater health benefits.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. What an exciting thought to leave our listeners with.
It is exciting.
This has been such an insightful deep dive.
It has.
We encourage everyone to keep those knowledge-seeking gears turning
Yeah.
and to continue exploring these fascinating topics because the journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning.
Absolutely.
You know, what's really striking to me is how this 5-day plan really changes how we think about food. It's not just fuel. It's like this tool we can use to really fine-tune our body's processes.
I totally agree. It's like we're moving past this simple idea of good foods and bad foods. And we're getting into this era where we can actually use food to target specific health outcomes.
And that leads me to a question that's been on my mind. If this 5-day plan can mimic fasting, are there other ways of eating that could maybe do the same thing?
That's a great question. And the answer is quite possibly. There's a lot of research into things like intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, even ketogenic diets, all suggesting that we can really change our metabolic pathways by changing when and what we eat.
Okay, let's break those down. We've talked a little about intermittent fasting, where you cycle between eating and fasting. How does that connect back to this 5-day plan?
Well, they both use calorie restriction, just in different ways. Intermittent fasting might be something like a 16.8 protocol, where you eat all your meals within an 8-hour window and then fast for the other 16.
So it's less about what you eat and more about when you eat.
Exactly. And the goal is the same, to shift your body into burning fat and maybe even trigger those same cellular cleaning processes we talked about.
Interesting. So different paths can lead to the same result.
It's a testament to how complex our bodies are. What works best for one person might not work for another.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got intermittent fasting. What about time-restricted feeding? Is that just a fancy name for intermittent fasting?
It's related, but it has a slightly different focus. Time-restricted feeding is all about aligning your eating with your body's natural circadian rhythms.
Ah, our internal clock.
Exactly. And those rhythms affect everything from sleep to digestion.
Right, they're pretty important.
And new research is suggesting that eating in sync with those rhythms might be even more beneficial than just restricting calories or timing our meals.
So what does that look like in practice? Earlier dinners and no late-night snacking.
Pretty much. The idea is to eat most of your calories earlier in the day when your metabolism is naturally higher, and then taper off as the day goes on.
That's kind of the opposite of what a lot of people do.
It is, but early research is suggesting that it could have some real benefits for metabolic health, weight management, even sleep quality.
It's amazing to think that just changing when we eat could have such a big impact. And we haven't even talked about the ketogenic diet yet. Where does that fit in with all this fasting mimicking stuff?
Well, the ketogenic diet, with its very low carbs and high fat, forces the body to switch from using glucose for energy to burning fat. Sound familiar?
It does. That's the same metabolic shift we were talking about with fasting and the 5-day plan.
Right. By cutting way back on carbs and increasing fat, your body goes into ketosis and starts using ketones from stored fat for energy.
So it's like hacking the body's fuel system. But how is that related to fasting?
Well, if you fast for a long time, it can also lead to ketosis. When you
No.
don't eat for a while, your body eventually runs out of glucose and has to turn to fat for fuel.
Ah, I see the connection now. Both keto and fasting can get your body into that fat-burning state, just in different ways.
Exactly. And the potential benefits are similar. Weight loss, better blood sugar control, less inflammation, maybe even some brain protecting effects.
This is also fascinating. It seems like there are so many different ways to tap into these metabolic benefits, each with its own pros and cons.
I think we're moving beyond this idea of good and bad foods and into a world of personalized nutrition. We can change how we eat to meet our specific health goals.
I love that. It's like instead of one size fits all, it's more like a custom tailored suit for your metabolism.
I like that analogy. It really emphasizes the idea that we have so much more control over our health than we used to think.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how powerful food can be.
I do too. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to explore some of these different approaches and find what works for them, because ultimately it's about giving everyone the power to take control of their own health.
I couldn't agree more. And on that empowering note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. We encourage you to keep learning and exploring these fascinating topics because the journey doesn't end here, it's just beginning.